Want to proceed?
Restart complete.
Y'all have a good trip.
Roger that.
Just slowly wait for it.
30.
29.
28.
27.
26.
25.
24.
23. 22.
21.
20 seconds and counting. 19.
18. 17.
16. 15.
14.
13.
12.
11.
10 seconds.
6.
5.
4. And 3.
2.
1.
Hello and welcome to Trust No One, the X-Files podcast, where my fellow agents and I discuss episodes of the X-Files. Today we'll discuss the first episode of the second season, entitled Little Green Men. It was written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong and originally aired on September the 16th, 1994. So welcome to season 2, everybody. Do we feel that the tone of the show has changed? Yes? No? Is it good? Is it bad? What do we think?
I think the tone's definitely changed. I think for the better.
In what way? How is it better? How has it changed?
Well, I think the season 1 sort of starts sort of falling into a formula sort of pattern, and obviously that involves, like, because the X-Files are open at that point, then. But now the X-Files are closed. Mulder and Scully even are separated. So stuff like that, I think, really affects like how the show is written and what happened.
What do you think, Agent Lisa?
Yeah, I agree with Agent Dan that the tone has changed, but I think that this episode in particular has a silly tone because it's melodramatic. And I'm not as excited about that because the X-Files tends to be witty and dry and intelligent, and certainly when I was a younger viewer, when the X-Files first aired, I was very attracted to the melodrama because I thought that was the sexiest thing. The hand-wringing kind of tone of this episode was something that really appealed to me. And now that I'm long in the tooth, I think that's silly. And I prefer it when the X-Files is more tongue-in-cheek and sort of more self-aware than melodramatic. Because this episode is all about like, the stakes are very high. And it's probably hard to write it, because you do want the viewers to think, oh my God, like the X-Files are no more, but they still have this mission. Can they accomplish it? That's kind of a big deal. What happens between Scully and Mulder when they don't see each other every day? Like, what happens to their relationship and their goals, right? But the way this episode, the tone of it is, to me, the tone is wrong in terms of like just my preference, To
me too, but I think like I totally relate to what you were saying about like being more accepting of the episode's tone as a younger viewer. I think it hasn't particularly necessarily aged that well.
I think it's classic existential crisis, midlife crisis type moment, isn't it? And you have that. Well, I have one when I was 13, definitely. And I think in that early midlife crisis, it was very much like, what do you do without your soulmate? And what happens when everything that you thought you knew turns out to be another lie and no one believes you? It's just, it's a nightmare, isn't it? Being that age.
Another lie.
Yeah. So I think the tone here is quite interesting because you've got Mulder, who's clearly in that sort of teenage angst, like, this is so annoying, work's really boring, and all my toys have been taken away, and there's no point in anything anymore. And Scully, who's sort of becoming a bit more philosophical and like, well, maybe there's a bigger meaning to life, So you've got those sort of splits there, which I think are really interesting, actually. We start off this episode then with Mulder's description of Voyager and the messages that have kind of gone out into space, and that kind of recurs throughout. Why start there? This is quite an interesting place to start.
Well, I think this episode explores the idea of hope And so, that the Voyager messages were a hopeful thing. Humanity was like, well, let's hope that we get a response. And our hopes were dashed because we got no response, or at least none we could understand or perceive. Maybe the aliens have been trying to respond and it's whoop. But so I think it's about hope, and I think that Mulder invoking that message of hope is the theme of the episode, and it's what his character struggles with. And ultimately, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but it is a 30-year-old show. I think ultimately, the viewers are wondering, will Mulder hold on to his hope? Even if he, like the Voyager messages, gets nothing in return.
Definitely.
I think that maybe it's because I was reading about the making of the episode, and they were saying, like, in a certain way, like they had to do like a second pilot. So I thought maybe it's a way of like giving context, opening with wide context, and then like focusing on these particular characters within that context as sort of like a second, so the viewers get their bearing, as it were, in the second pilot, as it were.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Definitely. I think there were lots of sort of discussions at the end of season 1 about whether they would even get a season 2. So I think this idea of, wanting to go out and hoping for something more is quite kind of astute, really, because I mean the ratings were not high in the beginning at all, and you can argue that that's because it was on a Friday night slot, right, and most people were out having real life fun on a Friday night. But it's an interesting one, I think, to start with Voyager, because it's this idea of sending out a signal and hoping somebody's going to pick it up, right, and somebody's going to respond, and that could be quite a nice sort of symbol of like the message that the X-Files team were putting out, and they wanted viewers to kind of respond and to tune in and to reply in that. So it's quite a nice idea. So Mulder, dear Mulder, at the start of this episode, he's feeling pretty bleak, isn't he? I think the quote is, "I wanted to believe, but the tools have been taken away. They closed our eyes. Our voices have been silent. Our ears now deaf to the realms of extreme possibilities." So how does that contrast with Mulder from season 1? And
he's turned into like a 14-year-old deep poet, or like a Twitter poet who's, I mean, this is the melodrama that I was complaining about earlier, and that I was so attracted to when I was younger. So, I think it makes him look ridiculous. And I know that the writers were aiming for this to be all about yearning and, deep thoughts and emotions, but it didn't hold up for me on this viewing. I thought it was just silly.
Agent Dan?
Agent Dan?
I thought, it might be appropriate to speak about like how the episode was sort of like intended to be like a Mulder version of Beyond the Sea.
Oh,
that's nice.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So in what ways? What's the sort of purpose of doing that, do you think, or how is it similar?
There was a quote in one of the books that apparently, like David Duchovny, when they were once they got the script for Beyond the Sea, he said something like, "This is a really interesting episode. When you're going to do like the same for me, for my character." So then, like, Little Green Man was adapted basically for his character at the start of the second season. Apparently, it was a feature film script originally that was a completely separate project, and then Glenn Morgan and James Wong decided to do it for the X-Files instead.
That's really cool. So why do we feel that he can't carry on then, that he's just sort of stuck in this weird sort of depression pit? What are the things that he's struggling to kind of find meaning in?
I don't think it's struggling to find meaning, because he knows he has a sense of the meaning for him. It's very personal. The episode is very personal, and it delves into his motivations. And and how passionate he is. But I think it's a matter of funding. I mean, they pay him to do a certain job, then they changed the job and they're paying him to do this new job, which admittedly isn't his favorite thing to do. But this is the only time that I will ever side with the cigarette smoking man. It's like, we're paying you to do this thing. Okay, so if wiretapping is what we're paying you for, then that's what you're gonna do. And if you want to do your side stuff, then that's fine. Enjoy your hobby. And so I think it's just a matter of he was given money and time and a partner to pursue his very favorite thing in the world to think about and discover. And now he's got to do it on his own time outside of work hours. And he's like, but I'm a 14-year-old who writes things on Twitter that change people's lives. You know?
I think there's definitely a sense, isn't there, that he's not even doing it in his own time anymore, right? Like it's just, he just seems to be in a complete pit. And I don't know, maybe there's partly that he's kind of mourning the losses, not just of the X-Files, but, of Deep Throat, of these close encounters. And I think early on in the episode, he says to Scully, I've got nothing, I've got no proof. And, she's desperately trying to console him and saying, yeah, but you remember your sister and all this sort of stuff. And the fact that he can just discount everything that they found, which has actually really emboldened her and really given her a lot of hope and, optimism and curiosity. I think it's really interesting the way that he's in such a pit at the beginning. But he gets sent on a little mission, so it's all fine after that, isn't he? Ultimately, like the romance and the love of his life is the X-Files. It's like almost like a little breakup, isn't it? In terms of your first love's just dumped you, and it's like there's no way coming back from that. So yeah, it's an interesting one. So to contrast, obviously, go on, Dan. Sorry.
I was thinking about how the search for contact with alien life might be analogous to the pursuit of contact that they want to have with each other.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I don't think he copes well without her. I think she is getting on with it and holding it together. But he's become really reliant on her. And everything that he associates with her, and the fact that he says, "Oh, you taught me how to do these things, and now I can't do these things." It does feel quite sort of tragic, I guess, in that way. I mean, Scully's opening monologue's equally, melancholic in a way, but it's quite beautiful because she's about to cut open somebody's brain. And she's sort of thinking and saying, oh, what he imagined, what he loved, what he saw, what he remembered, it's all locked in this small mass of tissue. There's beauty and there's magic in that kind of interpretation, right? And then her student says back, you sound spooky, What do we think of that moment?
Well, I think in contrast to Mulder's speech, that hers actually, that kind of gravitas makes sense. But the use of the word spooky by that intern, first of all, I was offended on Scully's behalf. I would have thrown down the scalpel and been like, sorry, what's that, intern bitch? Because I'm a surgeon and you're learning from me. So that's rude what you just said to me. And also I think that the writers just tried to like wedge that word in there so that like the viewers are like, oh, spooky. Where have I heard that before? Could that be a reference? And it's like, it was a little heavy-handed, right? But her actual monologue was poetic, and I think it was the deepness, the depth of it was appropriate to the subject matter, in my opinion. This is just, it's just my opinion, because you could argue otherwise. You could argue that hers is just as silly, but I didn't feel that way.
I didn't think it was silly. I thought it was maybe for teaching a class, it's maybe too over sentimental and like not as sort of coldly clinical as it should be, because then you started a bit maybe overemphasize empathize and be like, oh, what am I doing by cutting this brain open? Maybe that's something I don't particularly want to do.
You're right. It doesn't seem realistic, does it, for a surgeon who's trying to teach to suddenly become like philosophical and poetic about it? Because they realistically, she would probably be saying the opposite. Like, everything's cool. This is a perfectly normal thing to do. Don't mind the dead human and the brain we're about to see. Like, you're supposed to like keep everyone calm, because there is going to be that student that runs out to barf, right? And so it's yeah, you're right, Dan. I didn't think of it that way, but that's true. That's strange and wildly inappropriate.
I just like the kind of juxtaposition, the opposition of the fact that she has got a captive audience who ultimately are going to have to put up with her weirdly whimsical crap sometimes, and they might come back with a snarky comment, but she's still got the power in that room. Whereas Mulder, nobody's listening to him. In fact, he's listening to the drivel of other, lonely, sad-o men, actually, and kind of reflecting on that in his own way. And in fact, he gets a voicemail from some woman who we presume is some sort of hookup or prostitute, right? Like, so it's almost like he's there listening to his wiretap going, God, these men are so awful. And it's like, yeah, because you're seeing yourself in the mirror a little bit. Without the X-Files, without Scully, this is you. This is the potential for you. And so that's a really interesting one, I think.
I was thinking, firstly, like, I think Scully's speech, even though it might not work the best, like, from a realistic standpoint, I think it does work from a dramatic standpoint.
Yeah.
And I don't think the caller would probably be a prostitute. I think it would be like a hookup or escort. But she talks about, like, them having made plans to have dinner together.
Maybe I'm cynical, but I don't know. He's certainly seen in other episodes, isn't he? Kind of watching a lot of porn and organizing a lot of hookups and things. So maybe I'm extending that.
With a prostitute. I speak from experience. Just kidding.
I've
been taken for dinner. Just kidding.
I thought the wiretap work that he's doing with the guys talking about a strip club was really strange, because like they're specifically not talking about illegal activity from what we can hear of what they're saying.
Yeah. It's like, how futile is that project, right? And they know that it's futile. He's been put on it as a punishment, hasn't he, to know his place, and to say nobody's going to listen to you anymore. You're going to sit and listen to other kind of, uninteresting things. So it's quite, it's a conflict, I think. At the start of this episode, then, what is their relationship like? So we've got Mulder in his kind of early teenage midlife crisis. We've got Scully, who's becoming philosophical and slightly spooky in her world. What's their relationship like at this point?
I feel he's being unnecessarily cold and distant. I mean, he does explain that he thinks that their meeting is inappropriate and why, but he didn't need to go that far. I think he's being a little bit butthurt and a little bit like main character, like poetic man that's off brooding by himself with his windswept, thoughtful kind of demeanor. And she's just trying to be, she's trying to continue their relationship and their connection. I thought it was, I don't know, it just reminded me of real life situations where, in a relationship between a man and a woman, where things are changing. Our society has changed a lot lately, but at the time that this show was filmed, it was certainly expected of men to suck up their emotions and to deal with them themselves, and for women to be empathetic and try and be nurturing and to go after them and be like, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Are you okay? So I think that clearly I've been triggered because I'm kind of resentful of that dynamic. But I think that's, it was a sign of the times, and he was dealing with being depressed, and instead of reaching out to his colleague who knew him best, he dealt with it by pushing her away.
Yeah.
What do you think? I thought maybe like his standoffishness might be put on in a way because he is genuinely concerned about them like being seen together and or spied on or whatever, and that perhaps he hopes that like his standoffishness might make an impression with her, and she might be less likely to approach him, so that it'd be less likely to be seen together.
I'm sure you're right, and I think that that's an important part of it. I'm not a Mulder fan this episode, which is unusual for me. So I see it through that kind of filter. But I'm sure you're right that mostly he was trying to protect them both.
I thought it could be bad either way.
So the title of this episode is Little Green Men. Why is that important? It's important in lots of ways, but why do we think in this episode?
Well, apparently that's what the film script is called.
So it's a direct lift. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I remember that term being thrown around at the time as kind of like a little bit of a gentle mockery of the idea of there being such a thing as aliens. And I think that Mulder in the previous season alluded to it at some point with kind of like a knowing kind of acceptance, like, yes, I know it's a big joke to you, little green men, but to to him it's a lot more meaningful than that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a sense of like, well, who's going to believe the believers of Little Green Men? And he makes that lovely anecdote about elves, doesn't he? And there's that idea of like just these beings and what do they mean, and have we got any proof? And if there's no proof, does it matter? It's the sort of diminutive kind of version, I guess, of his whole belief system. Because if we talk about alien life, it's a amazing expansive term, but Little Green Men just seems to reduce it down to basically like a children's story or something irrelevant. So in this episode as well, we obviously get the flashback to Samantha's abduction, and it's featured in quite a lot of detail. We actually see a bit of interplay between the characters, etc. What do we think of that scene, and what do we think of the child actors?
I thought the boy that played Mulder was very good, but I was sort of wishing that the girl who played Samantha looks more like when we've seen Samantha in like Conduit and or Miracle Man. For some continuity. But they obviously recast the role for this episode.
I think that we have seen better child actors in this series, most notably for me in season 1, and the episode title is flown out of my head. I'm sorry, but it's the one where it's the man who's the fire starter, and he talks to these two young boys. I'm sorry.
Fire.
That's annoyingly simple.
So those kids were really believable, and they had a lot of sort of subtle emotions to play with, and they nailed it. I didn't think that these two were on that level, and also well, I see the value of the scene because this is all about Mulder's motivation, right, and his passion and explaining it. But I just the visual effects, I think are very dated, and so it's irritating for me to see.
I think that the young Mulder's given some quite hokey dialogue. Who's like, "Get out of my life," and
Yeah, that was weird. Did anybody ever say that? Because I've never heard that. Get out of my life.
When I first watched that, I was like, is this supposed to be a really ridiculous version of the actual event in terms of his memory is distorted and warped, or like, what's going on? But I don't think it was. I think it was just badly written. But I'd like to think that that's what was going on some sort of cool meta level, but I don't know. I think you're giving the writers too much credit. I think so.
You're right. That would have been very cool. And I think that had the X-Files been made today, that, you know, with the whole wink wink kind of self knowledge kind of way that we all are these days, and culturally aware and self-aware, that would have been a meta kind of a thing that happened, like this slightly ridiculous kind of unreliable memory, unreliable narrator. But you know, they're positioning Mulder to be an extremely reliable narrator. We're supposed to swallow everything. We're supposed to look up to him and admire his passion and be like, he is correct. He is the hero and he is right about everything. Right?
Definitely. I mean, I think in Fire, actually, he talks about having an eidetic memory. Like, I remember everything. And whether I want to remember it or not, you know, it's that horrible kind of play with the X, isn't it? Which is quite entertaining. So I think this is supposed to be realistic. And it's a shame that it doesn't work, because actually the layering's quite clever. In terms of, you've got Watergate in the background. I thought that was good. And the fact that Mulder doesn't really want to listen to Watergate, he wants to watch The Magician. You know, he's like, no, bring on the tricks and bring on the, you know, illusions instead. I thought that was hilarious. Some really cool stuff on the go. But yeah, I just thought the back and forth between him and his sisters, A, not very realistic, and B, didn't even show that they really loved or really hated each other. It needed to go one way or the other, I think. But,
oh yeah.
I thought it's interesting that this episode, the flashback, is like completely different to the way that you hear Mulder refer to it in Conduit, the third episode of this show. And apparently, like, there's a section in this book saying that, according to Chris Carter, it was because Mulder's memories are derived in that episode in Conduit from regression therapy. That's why those images are understandably vague, explaining why he would recall the incident differently at a later time. So Little Green Man is supposed to be like the accurate version, whereas Conduit is not.
That's interesting.
Oh, that's really cool. Thanks for digging that up, Dan. That makes it a lot more understandable. Because as the series goes on, that happens a lot. There are these like, he goes back to that memory, and Samantha's always different, which I understand. Child actresses age out, but they all look really different from one another, and his retelling of that event seems different sometimes. So yeah, that's interesting. That's really good to know that there's a reason other than oops.
Like in the first version, they're asleep, as he recalls it, when she was taken.
And they wake up, don't they? And there's a noise outside. Yeah, absolutely. So this is the first time on the X-Files that we actually see aliens. Woohoo! At last. And I know that Chris Carter said in various interviews the whole first season he didn't want to show them because he wanted to kind of build up to that. So we finally get the reveal of aliens. Was it effective? Do we like the way that they did that, or what could have been done better?
Well, as a former video editor from that time, I know exactly how it was done. You just put it in post-production, like digitize the footage, and then all you do is you put on a stretch effect, and it looks terrible. Oh. And I thought I was the coolest person in the world when I was doing it in the 90s, and I was not. And it just looks cheap and cheesy, and I understand what they were going for. They wanted to make it look like a skinny humanoid, but clearly not human creature. So to make it like too skinny, but to still have 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, you know, a recognizable humanoid that was clearly foreign. But I thought that the actual way it was done was just not, I don't know. Look, man, they had season 2 money. Like, why aren't we seeing it in this episode? Right? Like, they got a little bit of a cash injection. I know that they weren't getting a big budget yet because they weren't like the top show yet. But, you know, I think they could have, I don't know. I think there was a lot riding on this first episode of season 2, and I think they could have done better to make the alien look, I don't know, more mysterious, scarier. But instead, it just looked like a cheap TV show alien. Whereas the X-Files is often filmic, right? So
What do you think, Agent Dan?
I didn't think it was that memorable.
Mm.
I thought they did better with, like in season 6 and stuff like that. The other sort of with the claws and stuff. They do
Yeah.
better at that later on, I think.
It definitely massively improves. I think my favorite depiction of aliens in this episode actually is when Jorge draws the little head. So you get that little drawing. And I quite like that bit. I thought, well, yes, that'll do actually. And I'd rather just have had that and some noises. And then I could have imagined it in a more kind of disturbing way, I think. So the reason that Mulder kind of gets lifted out of his pit then is because he gets called up to the hill to meet the senator, which just sounds so dramatically lovely. Is it plausible the senator would want his help, or does that feel like a bit of a kind of, I don't know, narrative twist?
I love that question because no, it's not at all plausible. It's completely foolish and ridiculous, but it's fun. It's so entertaining. Like, it's just fun. Like, can't we just have fun and be entertained? But if no, that would never happen in real life. None of this would. This is all very silly.
Are you sure?
No.
I thought it felt very realistic. And also, I thought it was cool. I read the intention behind it was that it ties back to the pilot, because Mulder said it's got like resources in the Senate or whatever, and it's like they start now to appear.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love the idea that some of the senators or politicians would just have these secret kind of beliefs, and I'm just going to get that spooky guy up here. I think it works really nicely as why not? Let's go with that. If you've got deep government fighting against them, surely you'd have some for him, right?
Well, yeah, I think this comes from the hippies and like, so it's like, is it better to, because I have these ideas and I think Mulder might be right, but I'm working from within the system, and I've like climbed the rungs of the ladder, and I like my paycheck, and I like my status, and I like my power, but I still believe in what Mulder believes, so I'm gonna like be the good guy, even though I seem like a bad guy, man, but I'm a good guy, I'm cool, and I think this is just like in the 90s there was this revisiting of 60s values.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of where the writers got that kind of thought from, where there could be a deep throat who is actually sort of a good guy, even though he's running with the bad guys, never trust no one. Some of these guys, they're okay, man, they can hang, I could be wrong.
I really like, as I said to someone before, I can't remember, but I really like the senator's name, Richard Matheson, because Richard Matheson actually is a writer and author whose literature I really like, his work, his books. And apparently, because Kolchak the Night Stalker was such an influence in the X-Files, like they tried to cast Darren McGavin as the senator.
Oh, that would have been very cool. Wow. So in terms of that kind of 60s vibe, actually, it links quite nicely to the next sort of question. So the episode references the alleged closure of the SETI project, which was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, basically. So it was scanning the sky and hoping that alien radio signals would pop up. And there was a signal called the WOW signal in 77, which also gets referenced here. So does this episode kind of criticize the closure of such projects then? Is it saying we should keep searching, or what's the kind of commentary, I guess, around that kind of?
Yeah, that was the intention behind it, because Glenn Morgan was frustrated that the government had actually shut down the SETI project. In reality.
Did they shut it down?
Sorry.
No, go on, Lisa.
See, now that I'm getting sleep, I'm difficult to handle, because I'm like got energy. I've got interruption energy. I'll try and behave. I'm sorry. But yeah, like, I think that everything is ultimately written from the perspective of Mulder being a hero. So Mulder thinks it's a bad idea that anything like that is shut down. So we do,
I think that's it, isn't it? And it's like, the tools are taken away. It's kind of like, well, if we can't have the big telescope scanning the sky, what are we going to do? How will we get any further with the project type thing? And then I guess the the answer is, you know, if we've put the signals out there already, we're waiting for someone to respond, and would they respond in that sort of form anyway? Which is quite an interesting one. So then we get up to the base. So Mulder gets, you know, given endless budget again. Well done, Mulder, to go off on his expedition, and he makes it up to the telescope. And obviously, he finds this guy Jorge, who's just sort of stuck there, isn't he? Why is he important, and how did he remain there if, you know, the building looks all locked up and it seemed to be abandoned?
I was hoping you knew.
Mm.
Because it is mysterious, and maybe it's just a throwaway mysterious thing that we're not meant to figure out or know the answers to. Because it doesn't make sense logically how he could be in there, and what's the significance of it. I think it's I don't know. I don't know the answer. Maybe it's over my head. I just thought it was something that was like just another strange mystery that that adds to the general sense of strangeness of the show. It makes us feel insecure, you know, like this is weird. It doesn't make sense. I feel a little bit, I don't know. It adds to the drama, maybe.
I guess, like, go on, Dan. What were you going to say?
I think that's interesting. I just like assumed that maybe you might be like a truck driver or something that's broken onto the base, or like out of fear probably, or I was starting to think like, I wonder if like his, I wonder if he is an illusion, basically. But then I realized, well, later in the episode, Scully apparently sees him as well as body, as well.
Yeah. I had a similar thought. I was like, as Mulder actually started hallucinating, and as he got up there and he's talking to this witness that he kind of partially understands but doesn't. And then I thought, actually, is this one of the original scientists? Which makes sense with the language barrier and things as well. And then I thought, well, if he was one of the original scientists, you know, was he abducted? And has he then been dropped back down back into the locked building somehow? And all the signals and all the kind of records, you know, evidence that that's what's going on. And then obviously there's the second arrival of the aliens when Mulder's there. So I think he's quite important, because it was really interesting actually watching the episode and listening to what he had to say, and my very broken Spanish. It was quite cool to pick out, you know, the fact that he describes the different colored lights. He describes the men who are not men but are not animals, you know, all these things, which kind of paralleled a lot actually with Mulder's description of his abduction in the regression hypnosis. There were little fragments, and I was like, oh my God, it's Mulder again, but through this other kind of confused lens. And now Mulder was failing to understand Mulder, which I thought was quite entertaining. So so it was a lovely kind of little scene, really. And then of course he does the quality drawing, which I feel is one of the highlights of the episode.
Regarding like callbacks to earlier in the series, it seems to me like, I forgot to mention, but you know, in the flashback with Mulder and Samantha, and Mulder, the young Mulder, reaches like for a gun, I think it is, from the toolbox basically that's up high, and drops it. I didn't for years I didn't realize like why he drops it. I thought maybe it was just like accidental, but I'm sure the script says that it's supposed to be like heated. So I think it was like, you know, similar to when we've seen like in Conduit and stuff, there's you know, certain elements that are heated. So
that's cool. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's interesting. Yeah,
that's very cool. And I like the scene up in the lab, because it kind of mirrors that scene again as well, doesn't it? So yeah, that works really well. So then Scully, of course, comes to rescue him. Hooray for Scully! Thank goodness. Despite having to evade the various hilarities of the airport scenes and various other bits, which were quite surreal. So she manages to get there. And then obviously they have to leave, and they have this insane car chase. Was it necessary, or was it just really fun? I mean, I'm loving it because it's fun, but was it important?
I think it was, it added to the show, because again, it's another sign that like the stakes are high, basically.
That's the only thing that would make sense to me to make it necessary, is to raise the stakes, to make
And
it more dramatic. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe like the pacing, you know.
Well, yeah. You don't want to have a boring cop
Yeah.
drama. It's a detective drama.
Yeah.
It's more than that, but at its heart, is it really more? Is it really? Its foundation is that of a detective drama. You need a car chase, and you need people chasing you at the airport, and you need to be able to outwit them. And will you? Will you? Ah, you will. Okay.
I think they
I'm
had to
just
have a
laughing at how easily I was manipulated the first time around, and now that I'm wiser, I'm like, no, I know how you're trying to make me feel.
but you still feel it.
I still do. That's why I'm here.
It's just conscious. It's like, oh no. I really like the slightly gratuitous car chases and the airport, you know, hiding around corners. I mean, that went on for ages, that airport scene. I'm like, okay, we got it. You're being followed. It's like, oh my God, she's going this way. Oh my God. Oh, did you see what she did? She's clever. I was like, oh, yeah, fine.
But that makes it realistic. That's exactly, being in an airport is like, a minute feels like 3 hours. So if they made the scene a little bit long, then I'm like, yeah, that's realistic.
That's how it would feel. Absolutely. And I guess the car chase scene has to happen, because otherwise they'd just sit around looking at all the evidence for ages, wouldn't they? Like, Mulder doesn't want to leave there. He's very happy in that very remote location with evidence of aliens, you know.
Which was filmed in Vancouver, I read.
Which is amazing, by the way.
And it was meant to be like South America, but it's Vancouver. And I think I read that it was Chris Carter who said, if you look, you can see pine trees in the background.
Oh, I didn't notice any of that. I was completely convinced. Oh, there we go. That's when I get caught up in it. I'm like, oh my God, we're in South America. That must have been really expensive.
Yes. No.
Also, the airport scene always reminded me of Dr. No, the first James Bond film.
Yes.
With like James Bond and Felix Leiter, and you know, to have so many different folk in the airport altogether.
Definitely.
Well, now I'm angry because I'm thinking about like the money that they saved on not having to film it in Costa Rica. Should have gone to making a better alien effect. Some of that money been funneled into post-production, please. Now I'm mad.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Okay, great. So they managed to get back to reality and they're safe. And then we have the really nice standoff scene with, you know, Mulder's been hauled into the office and CSM's there and it's all going to kick off and he's getting a proper bollocking, isn't he, from Skinner, and it's all looking a bit bleak. But then Skinner just flips and like sides with Mulder. Like, what was going on there?
Well, I think it's more of the same. Like, so the senator, the Deep Throat, Skinner is another one of these like suits who underneath it all is he's an okay guy, you know, he's ridden a motorcycle, like he's had a little toke, like he, you know, he's cool, but it's not realistic that he could order the cigarette smoking man around. That's not realistic at all, and it's certainly not realistic in a bureaucratic government high-ranking setting like that. But it makes it really emotionally satisfying to be like, yeah, that's right. That's right, Skinner. You show him. You know, it's like never happened.
But there's something specifically said, because that Mulder says, and it shocks Skinner. What is it that Mulder says?
Oh, the phone tapping.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and he says it's illegal without doing this, and this. And Skinner, that's the turning point, isn't it? Because Skinner suddenly goes, "Get out!" Like, that's it. That's unacceptable. You know, you might want to force this guy to have work, like sit on endless sort of phone assignments, but you can't do that to him. That's ridiculous. So, and then he puts him back on the same assignment, obviously. But
also with Skinner, the Skinner scenes, I I thought, this is really interesting. Like earlier in the episode, when like he's aware of like Scully trying to find Mulder and stuff, and with the actor Skinner, Mitch Pileggi, having said that the way that he envisions the Skinner character originally was that Skinner has a crush on Scully.
Oh. That's a really strange idea, actually.
I'm glad they didn't do that. It would have
Yeah.
cheapened it. They would have cheapened it. Because
Yeah.
then Skinner siding with Mulder once in a while isn't because of his ideals, but it's because of his boner. No, I don't like it.
Now, if he fancied Mulder, that would have been a whole other twist. But you know,
That would have been cool.
yeah.
I think it was a way to sort of emphasize the conflict, as it were, between Skinner and Mulder.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, Skinner's been quite scathing the whole time, hasn't he? And he's like, look, we're done. This is ridiculous. Like, it's all stupid. And then when he realizes that actually, yeah, the CSM's obviously up to no good as well. It's like, well, I think for Skinner, it's almost like a shifting of allegiances, but it's also a question of, well, where is the trust here and what is possible? And, you know, maybe this guy has, you know, is actually onto something if they are tapping his phone and they're doing all these other things, right? So, yeah, it's an interesting moment, I think. So, yeah, Mulder's phone. Sorry, Dan, go on.
Sorry. I thought it was cool that there's the reference to Mulder's fish and stuff. For years, I've loved Mulder's apartment.
The long-suffering fish. I feel for the fish. Do you think they know what's going on? Maybe they know more than we know. That could be.
They might be aliens that have been trying to communicate this whole time.
Absolutely. And they're like, he's left the building again. Can he just sit down and then we could actually explain what's happening here? Honestly.
I think it's pretty cool that do you know there's 2 FBI agents that say, can you not just hurry up and feed the fish? And they say that to Scully, and she's like, it'll be bad for the fish. I quite like that line, and both of those actors are quite like, because I'm sure there's like one of them appeared later in Millennium, and the other appeared in Squeeze, I think it was.
Oh,
as another FBI agent.
Cool. Yeah, I really like that scene as well. And it's Scully being sneaky with a bit of paper, which is obviously very exciting, isn't it, as well? All the sleight of hand stuff and linking back to the magician thing that Marvels would prefer to watch. It's like, actually, she is the magic, isn't she? She's the one who plays all the tricks.
Right. Nice catch. Yeah, nice catch, Agent Bennett. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yay. I guess with that in mind slightly, like Mulder's phone obviously is tapped. He's not paranoid. Well, he is, but he's actually right. And Scully and Mulder were under surveillance. And Scully obviously goes from being quite condescending at the beginning of, okay, sweetheart, if that's what you need, we'll meet up with these weird conditions, to actually then having to full on evade loads of stuff later on. Does that make Scully look foolish at the beginning, or do we think she was fair enough to assume that nobody was really listening?
Well, I mean, she's on a journey, and I don't think it made her look foolish. I think it made her look skeptical, which is in line with her character. And I think that this episode showed her that, you know, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. So she started to sort of clue into the fact that some of this stuff is true, and that maybe she had been mistaken. And because she's wise and intelligent, that means she has to stay open-minded to allow new information to come in to change her mind. And so new information came in, and she had to change her mind because she's being chased at the airport by these very bad agents. Like, they're bad at their job, and there's 2 of them, but they lost her. But yeah.
Any thoughts, Dan?
Not about this question.
No, that's fine. So they finally get to kind of review the evidence that they've brought back. And of course, the tapes are blank and there's no hard evidence. And this goes full circle from the beginning where Mulder said, but you've got to have proof. You taught me that. So how are Mulder and Scully feeling then with their blank tapes at the end-ish of this episode?
I think Mulder's really disappointed.
He keeps playing them over and over, doesn't he? That's kind of how the end sort of happens. It's just he's going to keep listening just in case he's missed something, you know. So I thought that was quite significant just in terms of hope, and that he's gone from hopeless to hopeful to the point of maybe like, okay, well, you're not going to find it on those blank tapes, but it's nice that you're at least symbolically trying to pursue it again. So
I think it was a very positive. I think it showed that despite this big loss, like he had the proof in his hand, despite that, the fact that he was reinvigorated and recommitted to his cause showed that, you know, despite that I'm sorry. I actually didn't get that much sleep last night.
That he's reinvigorated and he's like found his purpose again, yeah?
Sure. So I think that in a sense, it actually was there to show that he got over it very quickly because of the fire that never goes out that's inside him. You know, his very strong sense of purpose, which was kind of damaged at the beginning of the episode. And we found that despite this huge loss of him losing this evidence that he had it. Despite that he is ready to keep going, you know. So you know, that was a very, I think, really beautiful and meaningful story arc, despite my criticism of everything else. Like I actually thought that kind of rediscovering his faith and that kind of resilience is something that is very you know, meaningful and attractive just in any human being.
I really like that as well. And, you know, I think the beginning, he's so alone, isn't he? And he just feels like there's nothing and no one, and he can't even see the point in a relationship with Scully anymore because he just thinks they're being followed and, you know, listening on it. It's all rubbish. And then he goes from that to having the tape in his hand, and yes, it's blank, but he knew what was on it and he trusts himself again. And that she's come and saved his life again. You know, it's like, what a great test of their friendship. It's like, I'm literally going to go into the jungle in the middle of South America. Are you going to come and find me this time? She's like, yeah, all right, let's go. So it's just beautiful. I think that's wonderful. You know, she's not having to put a Post-it note on his desk and meet in a bloody car park. It's like, no, let's go on an adventure. So I think it's a lovely final little scene actually as well. And Mulder kind of adds on at the end, you know, he says, I still have my work, I still have you, and I still have myself. Oh, I really like that. I really like that pattern.
It was so romantic.
It was so romantic, exactly. Yeah. And this is where I go all gooey, right? Because I'm completely for them saving each other's lives over and over again.
Well, and the quest. Like, I don't just mean the romance between them. I also mean the romance of the hero's quest. Yes. You know, like this is worth it. It doesn't matter how many times we lose the evidence. Like we're gonna keep on going. You know, so that's got this romance as well. You know,
definitely. Yeah, I really love that. So Scully is sort of staring at him, or staring generally as he's saying that. Why doesn't she respond, or what do you think's going on in her mind at that point?
I don't read that scene, apart from what you're saying about the romance of the quest. I didn't read that romantically at all between the two of them.
Is she just feeling like, yes, we're back on track then, or what's she feeling at that point?
Yeah, I think so.
I think she admires him in that scene. I think that's why she's staring, because, you know, her skeptical little heart is growing 3 sizes in that moment.
I didn't think she was staring though. I thought she basically does like a double take, and she's like, I didn't expect you to feel that way. There's a bit of that, I think, as well.
I think she's really relieved. I think she's like, yes, you were really lost, and now you figured it out again, and you've kind of come back to yourself. And I think the way that list goes, my work, you, and myself, the fact that he ends on himself when he has been so lost is so profound. And because she cares about him so much, it's that sense of, yes, you aren't lost anymore. I'm not going to have to sit and listen to you moaning anymore, but also you've got the resilience and the drive to keep going, which she has had the whole way through. She's just been wanting him alongside her again, and now he's got that. I think she's like, oh, thank goodness I've got a grown-up back. I'm not going to have to deal with the sulky teenage Mulder again, not for at least a couple of episodes anyway. Fantastic. So what do we think of this episode overall then? Did we have any particular favorite moments or scenes that we particularly liked, or minor characters? Anything we want to add?
I liked the scene with the soldiers coming to, I guess, like the division of the army that's there specifically for retrieving evidence of alien life. Those guys.
Those guys,
when he came in, and then Mulder and Scully had to like scram. I liked it so much that I actually went online to find out more about the scene, and it turns out that it was terrible to film because these big burly soldiers they knew that the gun noises would be made in post-production. And so while they were acting the scene, they were making like pew pew, bang bang noises. And Scully's and Gillian Anderson said that everyone was hysterically laughing, and it was hard to act through it because these big guys were like pew pew, bang bang, So, but that's a big juxtaposition because the actual scene and the way it came across was supremely dramatic. Like, even though I knew everyone would be okay, I was on the edge of my seat with bated breath. Like, holy moly, they're being chased out by the army. They better go. Run.
Definitely that old line about don't work with children, animals, or the military, isn't it? It makes a lot of sense. None of them will follow orders unless they want to. What about you, Dan? Any favorite bits or favorite characters? Or
I had something to say, but I can't remember now. Went straight out of my mind.
That's all right. If it comes back to you, you can let us know.
I'm glad it's happened to someone else this episode.
I wondered, because I knew Gillian Anderson was pregnant at the time they filmed this episode. I wondered if that was visible at all, and I concluded that even if it's not visible in her body, I could still tell by her face she was glowing. I felt like. Yeah,
I thought they shot it really well actually in terms of that, because I'd forgotten actually that she was still pregnant by that stage. I think in my head I was like, oh yeah, season 1 she was really pregnant, and then season 2, oh yeah, no, then she is but in this episode it didn't remind me at all. In the previous ones I was like, oh, that's obviously one of those high shots because of this, or one of those ridiculously bulky suits, and I was like, sure. But no, in this one I thought they did a really good job with that.
Also, I wondered if in the airport scene, there's the two black people or people of color, the man and the woman, and the woman's wearing a clearly flowing dress that's not shaped to her body at all, and I wondered maybe is that something to do with the fact that Gillian Anderson was pregnant at the time. I wasn't sure.
Or they just made all the women look floaty and potentially pregnant.
Yeah.
Dan, I'm sorry to tell you, I think that's just 90s fashion, and I was there for it. I partook in it, and it's the worst thing that's ever happened to the way people presented themselves. There's no period in history where people looked worse.
The age of the maxi dress was a tragic loss for all of humanity, really. So yeah,
I don't know. Some 1970s maxi dresses are quite elegant, but in the 90s they were repurposed with terrible patterns and colors. And just and then for some reason the shoulders were added. Nah, man, just all
There's
wrong.
a lot going on.
Yeah, none of it
Rarely
good.
was it.
There was a lot. It was very busy. There's too much
Definitely.
material, too much everything. Yeah. Because that was an attractive actress. Like she could have looked great.
Oh yeah, definitely.
They ruined her.
I think probably my favorite scene, just thematically probably, is when they are talking about the music that was put onto the disc and sent out into space. And it made me look up actually what other forms of music were on there, because I knew there was Bach and I knew there was other classical, but there was an amazing array of music. So there was everything from pop all the way through to like Navajo chanting. All, you know, it was an incredible range from all over the planet. And that really, it struck me that was quite a beautiful thing, actually. And yeah, they've chosen Bach for whatever reason, but yeah,
I know
it
Johnny
made
B.
me
Good
think
was
a lot
on
more.
there.
What? Sorry, was Johnny B. Good? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Can I
But
ask you
also-
too if you were as irritated as I was that they kept playing exactly the same bar of music from the Bach? It's
It
like
really upset me.
by the third or fourth time that I heard that, it felt like a knife in my ear. Like, come on, there are other parts of that piece of music you might explore. Or was it a licensing thing where they were like, we paid for that one bar, so you're going to hear those notes again and again?
I mean, I don't know. Bach is very dead, right? Like, I don't think he's coming back to kick off about licensing, but
No,
maybe
but it's
the
not
story.
him, it's the estate, right? And they're like,
Really?
the company,
That's
yeah,
horrible.
oh yeah, like whoever owns the rights to the copyright to that music is who's going to sue the heck out of the X-Files if they
Wow.
play anything other than that, if they paid for only that.
No, but I
That's
don't
Yeah,
think that would be under copyright law, because it's like, what is it? Something like the lifetime of the person who's done it plus 50 years in the
Yeah, I know that's the UK. I don't know if that's other places as well, though.
States.
It would be
Or
interesting.
well, I
50
know
or
that
70 years.
when I was working as a video editor, there was constant panic about, you know, like, hold on, let's triple check that we're allowed to use this. And the companies I worked for would routinely get sued because people would try and get away with stuff. We would never try to get away with using Bach. It's like it would be like using like the Beatles or something. Like, you don't do that. You can't afford it. You're gonna get sued. Don't even try.
I've got a feeling with the choice of just those few bars of Bach that they didn't think the audience would know a lot of Bach. So they're like, here's it the first time. Do you remember that? Have it again, have it again, have it again, which I found really patronizing and quite upsetting. But then it was like when he's in the laboratory and he's like listening back to the play, and at some point in there he says, trust no one, and it repeats back, trust no one to him. I'm like, that's when I thought it was all in his mind. And until Scully got there, I wasn't convinced that it wasn't all in his mind, actually. So maybe it's just that idea of like something looping around and a memory coming back and repeating over. But yeah,
you're too smart for this show because you always ascribe like higher motivations than they probably had. Like you're always like, you're like, that's dumb. I wonder if they meant something else that was a lot more intelligent and clever. I wonder if, and then you come up with ideas that are better. So I wish that you were a writer on the show.
I will be for the next season. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Oh man, those two are not aging the way that I hoped. I don't want to see. No, I don't like their acting anymore. They're phoning it in. No more seasons. No more seasons.
No, I don't think there should be more seasons. I mean, that is a whole other debate for another time, right? But
yeah,
no, I'm like, let's keep it pure. Thank you. That's very good.
Keep it pure. Yeah.
I remembered my favorite scene because I'm a massive fan of the montages in the X-Files, and it seems like the first one, as far as I can remember.
Yeah,
Love the start of the episode.
Yeah, it was really nice, actually, wasn't it? And it was pieced together from beautiful footage, and it did have that, you know, yes, it was definitely melodramatic and somewhat pretentious, but it still elevated it. It still made me feel like, oh no, this is something big. This is something beyond our planet, beyond the universe. Like it was
Yes.
spectacular in terms of that, actually. And that there was genuine history there, and you know, the wow signal genuinely happened, and whichever other signals we'll probably never know about. But I like
And
the
the Watergate too. I mean, that's
yeah.
significant. That, you know, look, what better piece of footage to hammer into us? Trust no one, because once Watergate happened, that changed the way the world and Americans viewed the American government. It was over after that. It's been constant mistrust and suspicion since then. And so for them to put that piece of footage in the background, and Mulder as a kid is still absorbing it, even though he doesn't care, but he's absorbing it. So like the message of mistrust, I think, is strong with that one.
and Chris Carter having said that he was influenced as a kid by the Watergate scandal.
Oh well, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Given his given the themes in the X-Files, that would make sense.
But also with the wow signal, I have read like articles that have said like there have been quite a few signals like that that have been picked up. It's not just been like one.
See, I found that very reassuring. That the aliens would try and speak to us in our own very simple language. You know, clearly there's some sort of attempt, isn't there, to go, all right, peeps, we're going to try and level with you, and we'll try and beep at you and see if you can work it out. I don't know, it just feels like Morse code or something, and we're too slow to get it yet, but maybe we will. Probably the dolphins have understood. I've got far more faith in the dolphin community, to be fair.
Well, the fish in Mulder's tank are trying to tell him this whole time. What are they meant to do? What does he expect them to do? They're right there gulping at him, and you know, with the gills and everything, doing the Morse code with their gills, and he's like, it's just sailing over his dumb head.
Definitely. And in terms of star performances, actually, I would rate the fish. The fish do an absolutely cracking job under the pressure.
Those fish are dead now.
Oh, that makes me really sad.
They don't live that long, Agent Bennett. They don't live that long.
But is it just the same spirit in a new fish the whole time until we get it, you know?
Maybe.
I was thinking, out of the three that you listed, I was like, where's the animals? And now I realised, well, it's got the fish, so it's got the kids, the animals, and the...
There you go, and the military, yeah. They did it all. People.
Yeah, how do you wrangle them? Yeah.
Exactly. Fish food. All about the fish food. Okay, cool. So on that note then, how many X's would we give this episode out of 10?
I'll give it 6.
7.5.
Ooh, go on then. Tell me why. Why 6 and why 7.5?
Well, as I said, like near the start, I don't think it's particularly aged very well. But I thought like certain aspects are interesting, like the all the alien stuff and the stuff with Jorge, and some parts are exciting, and you get the relationship with Mulder and Scully that's a bit different from like what we see a lot of in season 1, I think. And yeah, I like the introduction of the senator. So actually, maybe a 7.
You've talked yourself up. Okay, right. Do you want to keep talking and get yourself to an 8, or are you good on the?
I want to see that.
2 hours later.
Good one.
Excellent. And Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah, well, you know, it's higher for me because I do love the relationship between them, that you know, we see the strong bond, how Scully is willing to go far out of her way to support Mulder, and we see that Mulder does need Scully, and he's not, you know, what is it, every man is an island unto himself, or whatever, like lone wolf guy, like he needs her, and so that relationship gets further explored. Mulder's psyche gets further explored. So I love the theme of, you know, starting with depression and ending with resolve. You know, that personally speaks to me. And I think that there were funny and witty and poetic moments, and I like how some of it was shot a lot, but it's not higher than a 7.5 because I'm annoyed with the post-production. I think that they had the money and time, and motivation to make the first episode look more filmic and more high quality instead of a cheap, fast television show. And I also found some of it, you know, like Dan said, dated, and some of it tragically melodramatic. And I think really I'm just mad at myself for you know falling for it back. I'm just like, come on, that's cheesy. Why did you enjoy that so much? You shouldn't have enjoyed that so much.
Maybe a 6.5 then.
No, man.
Yeah, you're gonna talk yourself
No,
down.
because the car chase was fun. The soldiers chasing them was fun, and the whole thing, the fish feeding. Come on, man, the whole thing was so entertaining and fun. And even the like, do you enjoy Bach? I live for Bach. Like that cheesy shit was fun. The whole thing, like, it's so entertaining. I love the X-Files. I love the X-Files. I don't think I've ever gone lower than a 7.
Awesome.
Maybe I should.
No, I think you're solid. I think you're in a good place. I'm going in with an 8, and I'll tell you why.
What?
So I think it's an 8 because I think it does a little bit of everything for everyone. So all the different reasons that people will watch the X-Files, there is something for everyone in there. If you're in it for Mulder's delusional, potential, traumatized past, the stuff there. If you want to see Scully being a forceful, like, you know, woman and going out there and saving him and doing all of that. If you want to see her kicking ass in the laboratory with a scalpel, like she's doing that as well. She picks up on all the clues, you know, she listens to the fish when no one else does, you know, she's like the force. So she's amazing in it. And then I just love all the kind of layering of, you know, the truth of SETI and the truth of the wow signal and the truth of, you know, this idea of corruption within the government, but you've also then got the good guys in the government, you know, and the senator and everything else. You get actual aliens. That's pretty good. And then by the time we get to the end, you get this really lovely kind of intimate scene where he's carrying on with his job, but he's carrying on with his real work now as well. And Scully's there beside him, supporting him through that. So yeah, yes, it's flawed. Yes, it's melodramatic. Yes, it's cheesy. And yes, the aliens are a bit shit. But all in all, for a kind of opener for season 2, you know, I love it, and it's got a lot of kind of very sentimental memories, I think, for me as well, because I didn't think there was going to be a season 2 when it came out, and I was like, oh my god, now Skinner's turned, it's all going to happen. So yeah, so that's why I've gone with my outrageously high score of 8, and I'm talking myself just into sticking with that, I think, pretty much. So that's really good. Okay, thank you very much to the panelists for joining this discussion. We hope that you, our viewers, have enjoyed it too. Let us know in the comments section what you thought about this episode, and please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and we will see you next time, and the truth is still out there.